So, picture this: Los Angeles in the 1930s. The city wasn't just growing, it was exploding like a firecracker in slow motion. Skyscrapers were going up, new roads were being paved every week, and the movie industry was turning dusty backlots into gold mines. But in the middle of all that, LA had a problem. A big one: the LA River. Back then, it wasn't the dull concrete trench we know today. It was a wild, untamed, unpredictable beast. When it rained hard, which it sometimes did despite LA's sunny rep, the river would overflow like crazy, flooding entire blocks, swallowing homes, and even dragging people and cars away. It was causing destruction on a massive scale, and the city couldn't grow with a river that kept acting like a ticking time bomb. So officials decided to do what LA does best: pretend they had control over nature. They launched this huge, expensive Depression-era public works project to tame the river, dig it up, reroute it, and eventually box it in with concrete. It was all about progress, order, and cleaning up the city's rough edges. But nobody expected what they'd find once they started digging under the surface. The workers came in expecting the usual mess: mud, trash, old logs, maybe a few pieces of scrap metal from past floods. But they weren't ready for what they actually found: human bones. And not just one or two. It started with a few fragments, then full skeletons started showing up. Some of the bones had obvious signs of damage, like fractured skulls or ribs that looked like they'd taken a serious beating. A few were even burned, like someone had tried to erase the evidence fast. At first, people tried to pass it off as remains from old native burial grounds, which sadly was often the default excuse back then, just a way to explain away any discovery without having to dig too deep, literally or metaphorically. But the deeper the crews dug, the weirder it all got. These weren't organized graves or sacred sites. These were random, scattered remains, tossed into the dirt like garbage. And yet, despite how disturbing it was, people mostly kept quiet. It was the Great Depression. Jobs were hard to come by, and nobody wanted to be the guy who got laid off for asking too many questions. But the unease spread fast. The work site started buzzing with stories, and the city definitely didn't want those stories leaking out to the public. And it wasn't just bones. The more they dug, the more relics they unearthed. Stuff that didn't belong in any official version of LA's history. Workers pulled up old wagon wheels and rusted-out revolvers, bits of broken glass from ancient whiskey bottles, and jewelry that looked like it had been lost for generations. One guy supposedly found a locket with a faded photo of a woman dressed in Victorian clothes. Her face cracked behind the old glass like she was still staring back at whoever opened it. Another unearthed what looked like the remains of a homemade jail cell: wooden beams, rotting metal bars, and a single boot heel stuck in a chunk of dried mud. These weren't museum artifacts. These were leftovers from real, gritty lives. People who'd lived, fought, and maybe even died right on the riverbank. It felt like digging up a graveyard mixed with a crime scene mixed with a time capsule. But instead of treating it like the historic gold mine it was, the city kept pushing forward, trying to stay on schedule, acting like they were building something heroic. Like all those broken lives and hidden stories didn't matter. Eventually, enough stuff got dug up that they had no choice but to bring in some experts: archaeologists, historians, the usual suspects. But it all felt performative, more about controlling the narrative than uncovering the truth. Officially, the story was safe. They disturbed some Native American sites, found a few early settler artifacts, and everything else was unremarkable. But the people who were there told a different story. There were rumors of full skeletons being quietly loaded into trucks before anyone with a camera could show up. Stories about cars found half buried in the soil with bullet holes in the windows. One former crew member supposedly told his grandson that they found an entire bricked-off tunnel under one section, complete with old tools, a few stained cots, and something that smelled like decay. None of that made the newspapers. Instead, the media focused on the progress being made, how LA was transforming into a modern marvel. No mention of the ghosts that had to be shoveled out of the way first. And really, that's always been LA's thing. Bury the past, then build something shiny on top of it. The LA River Project wasn't just about water control, it was about image control. The city wanted to be the future, but that future couldn't include stories of murder dumps, vigilante justice, or forgotten people. The concrete channel they built didn't just reroute a river, it sealed up a whole chunk of the city's history, because once they locked the river into that gray trench, they stopped the digging, they stopped looking, and they made it that much harder for anyone else to find out what had really been buried there. It was like they'd put a lid on a boiling pot and hoped no one would ask what was cooking underneath. Now, every time you walk past that concrete riverbed or drive over it without even noticing, you're crossing a place that holds way more than water. You're passing over decades of lives that never made it into the movies, people whose stories were literally paved over in the name of development. The LA River isn't just a forgotten waterway, it's a sealed tomb of forgotten crimes, vanished communities, and truths the city didn't want anyone to remember. And sure, it might just look like a slab of concrete today. But under all that cement and rebar is a version of LA that never made it into the history books. A version that's still down there, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to dig it up again.